Jake Morrison was 20 years old when the first alien ships appeared over Mars Colony 7. He was working in the mining station that day, deep underground, when the sirens started screaming. The sound echoed through the tunnels like the voice of death itself. He climbed to the surface with the other miners and saw them. Massive ships that looked like silver teardrops hanging in the red sky. They were beautiful and terrible at the same time. Jake had never seen anything so frightening in his life. The ships hung there for 3 hours. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The whole colony just watched and waited. Then the first beam of light came down from the largest ship. It touched the main dome of the colony and turned everything inside to glass. Jake watched his home become a crystal sculpture in seconds. He watched his friends become statues of frozen light. That was the day Jake Morrison learned what aliens could do to humans. That was also the day he decided to fight back. The Zephyrian Empire had been watching Earth and its colonies for 50 years. They thought humans were just another primitive species that would surrender when faced with superior technology. They were wrong. Humans did not surrender. Humans got angry. Jake enlisted in the Terran Defense Force 3 days after his colony died. He was not the only one. Recruitment centers on every human world were flooded with volunteers. The aliens had made one critical mistake. They had shown humans exactly what they were capable of, and humans decided they would rather die fighting than live as slaves. Basic training was supposed to take 6 months. The war started in 3. Jake found himself on a transport ship heading to Vega Prime with a rifle. He barely knew how to use an armor that did not fit properly. He was scared, angry, and completely unprepared for what was coming. The Battle of Vega Prime lasted 8 months. Jake learned to fight in those 8 months. He learned to kill. He learned to watch his friends die and keep moving forward. Most importantly, he learned that humans could do things that should have been impossible. The Zephyrians had better weapons, better ships, and better technology. They also had something humans did not have. They had limits. When things got too difficult, when casualties got too high, when victory seemed impossible, the aliens would retreat and regroup. Humans did not retreat. Humans found ways to make impossible things possible. Jake's unit, the 47th Shock Division, became famous for refusing to give up. When their base was surrounded for 3 weeks, they dug tunnels and attacked from underground. When their ammunition ran out, they used mining explosives and kitchen knives. When their commanding officer died, Jake took over and led them to victory using tactics he made up as he went along. The aliens started calling him the Ghost Walker. They said he could move through death without dying. Jake did not feel like a ghost. He felt like a man who had learned that the only way to stay human was to become something else entirely. After Vega Prime, Jake was promoted to lieutenant. After the siege of Europa Station, he became captain. Each promotion came with more responsibility, more dead friends, and more nightmares. But it also came with something else: knowledge. Jake was learning how to fight aliens in ways that no human had ever fought before. The Zephyrians fought like machines. They followed patterns, used standard tactics, and expected their enemies to do the same. Humans did not follow patterns. Humans improvised. Humans cheated. Humans did whatever it took to win, even if it made no sense. At Europa Station, Jake led a charge using mining equipment against military fortifications. It should not have worked. The aliens had shields that could stop plasma cannons, but mining lasers were not designed as weapons, so the shields did not recognize them as threats. Jake's men cut through the fortifications like they were made of paper. The siege broke in 6 hours. Jake was promoted to major and given command of an entire regiment. He was 25 years old and had already killed more aliens than most soldiers would see in their entire careers. The war continued for 7 more years after Europa Station. Jake fought on 17 different worlds. He developed new tactics that became standard training for all human forces. He saved colonies, won battles that could not be won, and slowly built a reputation as the human the aliens feared most. But something was happening to Jake Morrison during those years. Something was changing inside him. Every battle, every dead. Friend, every impossible victory was taking something away from him. He was becoming exactly what the war needed him to become. He was becoming the perfect soldier. By the time Jake turned 30, he could look at any battlefield and immediately see every weakness, every opportunity, every way to turn defeat into victory. He could inspire broken men to fight again with just a few words. He could make tactical decisions in seconds that would take other commanders hours to plan. He was also becoming something that was not quite human anymore. The other soldiers noticed. At first, Jake never seemed to sleep. He never seemed to eat unless someone reminded him. He would stare at maps and battle plans for hours without moving. When he spoke, it was only about the war. When he smiled, it was only after winning a battle. Dr. Lisa Campbell, a psychiatrist assigned to his unit, tried to talk to Jake about what was happening to him. Jake listened politely and answered all her questions. But she could see in his eyes that part of him was already gone. The part that could think about anything except war was disappearing. Jake did not care. The war was all that mattered. Winning was all that mattered. Keeping humans alive was all that mattered. If becoming less human was the price of human survival, then Jake Morrison was willing to pay it. By his 30th birthday, Jake had been promoted to colonel and commanded 3 full regiments. He had won battles on 23 worlds and saved the lives of over 1 million human civilians. The aliens knew his name and feared his tactics. His own men followed him with the kind of loyalty usually reserved for gods. Jake Morrison had become the most successful human military commander in history. He had also become something that could barely remember what it felt like to be human. The war was almost over. The Zephyrians were losing badly, and everyone knew it. Soon there would be peace negotiations. Soon Jake would have to figure out what to do with himself when there were no more battles to fight. That was when Jake Morrison realized he had survived the war, but lost something far more important than his life. He had lost the part of himself that made winning worthwhile. The peace treaty was signed on a cold Tuesday morning aboard the neutral ship, Harmony's Edge. Jake Morrison stood in his dress uniform, watching alien diplomats shake hands with human representatives. The ceremony was broadcast across every human world. People were celebrating in the streets. The war was finally over. Jake felt nothing. He watched the Zephyrian High Commander bow formally to the human delegation. This was the same alien who had ordered the destruction of Mars Colony 7 12 years ago. The same alien who had killed Jake's friends, his family, his entire world. Now they were all smiling and talking about peace. Dr. Lisa Campbell stood beside Jake during the ceremony. She had been studying human soldiers throughout the war, trying to understand what combat did to the human mind. Jake was her most important case study. She watched him carefully as the peace accords were read aloud. Jake's face showed nothing. No anger, no relief, no happiness. His eyes were empty, like looking into deep space. Dr. Campbell had seen this look before in other soldiers, but never this extreme. Jake Morrison had survived 12 years of war, but something inside him had died along the way. After the ceremony, Jake was supposed to return to Earth as a hero. There would be parades, medals, and speeches. The government wanted to make him the face of human victory. Jake did not want any of it. He asked for a transfer to the Colonial Defense Academy instead. He wanted to teach, not celebrate. The academy was located on Luna Base, far from Earth and the victory celebrations. Jake thought he would find peace there, teaching young officers about tactics and strategy. He was wrong. Peace was harder than war for Jake Morrison. In war, everything was simple. There were enemies to fight, battles to win, and people to save. Every decision had a clear purpose. Every action mattered. In peace, nothing seemed to matter at all. Jake tried to teach his students about the battles he had fought. He showed them maps and tactical analyses. He explained how to use improvised weapons and unconventional strategies. His lectures were brilliant, but something was wrong. The students could see it in his eyes. When Jake talked about battle, he was not really in the classroom anymore. He was back on those battlefields, reliving every moment. His voice would change, becoming cold and distant. He would pace the room like a caged animal, drawing battle plans in the air with his hands. One student, Lieutenant Amy Torres, stayed after class one day to talk to Jake. She was young, maybe 22, with bright eyes that reminded Jake of himself before the war. She asked him why he never talked about anything except fighting. Jake looked at her for a long moment, trying to remember what else there was to talk about. Before the war, he had enjoyed movies, music, and spending time with friends. Now he could barely remember what any of those things felt like. The war had consumed everything else inside him. Dr. Campbell began meeting with Jake regularly. She was trying to help him adjust to civilian life, but it was not working. Jake would sit in her office, answering her questions politely, but she could tell he was not really there. Part of him was still fighting the war. She asked Jake about his dreams. He told her he dreamed about battles every night. Not nightmares exactly, just endless tactical scenarios playing out in his mind. Even in sleep, he was still solving military problems. She asked Jake about his feelings. He told her he did not feel much of anything anymore. Anger, fear, joy, sadness, they all seemed like distant memories. The only thing that felt real was the need to fight, to win, to protect humans from threats. Dr. Campbell realized that Jake had become something unprecedented in human psychology. He had not just survived trauma, he had adapted to it so completely that he could no longer function without it. Jake Morrison had become the perfect soldier by ceasing to be a complete human being. The irony was devastating. Humanity had won the war because of people like Jake. His tactical innovations had saved millions of lives. His refusal to surrender had inspired an entire generation of human soldiers. But the victory had cost Jake everything that made life worth living. Jake tried dating a civilian woman named Helen Brooks. She worked at the Academy's administration office and seemed genuinely interested in him. They went to dinner a few times, watched movies together, tried to have normal conversations. Helen was kind and patient, but she could not understand Jake. When she talked about her hopes and dreams, Jake would nod politely, but could not relate. When she asked about his plans for the future, Jake would talk about theoretical military scenarios. When she tried to hold his hand, Jake would flinch automatically, his body still programmed for combat readiness. After 3 months, Helen gently ended their relationship. She told Jake that she felt like she was dating a ghost. Jake did not argue with her assessment. He felt like a ghost too. Jake began spending his free time alone in his small apartment, reviewing old battle footage and tactical manuals. He would study the same battles over and over, looking for ways he could have won faster with fewer casualties. It was the only thing that felt meaningful to him anymore. Dr. Campbell wrote in her reports that Jake represented a new kind of war casualty. He had not been broken by combat. He had been perfected by it. Every normal human emotion and desire had been stripped away, leaving only the parts that were useful for warfare. She compared Jake to an athlete who had trained so intensively for competition that they could no longer enjoy casual sports. Except Jake's sport had been staying alive and keeping other humans alive. Now that the competition was over, he did not know how to simply live. The worst part was that Jake understood what had happened to him. He was not crazy or delusional. He knew exactly what he had lost. He remembered being young and excited about life. He remembered caring about things that had nothing to do with war. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. Late at night, Jake would sometimes try to feel something other than tactical analysis. He would watch old videos of his colony before it was destroyed, trying to remember what happiness felt like. He would look at pictures of the students he taught, trying to care about their futures beyond their military potential. Nothing worked. The part of Jake Morrison that could love, dream, and hope had been sacrificed on the altar of human survival. He had saved his species by giving up his soul. Jake Morrison had become humanity's greatest hero and its most tragic casualty, all at the same time. Jake was sitting in his small apartment on Titan Colony when the door chimed. He was not expecting visitors. Almost no one visited him anymore. He had become too difficult to be around, too distant from normal human interaction. He opened the door and froze. Standing in the hallway was a Zephyrine, tall and elegant with silver skin that seemed to glow in the artificial light. Jake's hand moved automatically toward where his weapon would have been during the war. But there was no weapon, and there was no war anymore. The alien spoke in perfect English. "Colonel Morrison, my name is Kethfer. I was battle coordinator during the siege of Vega Prime. I believe you remember me." Jake did remember. Kethvar had been his opposite number during those brutal 14 months of fighting. They had never met face to face, but Jake had studied every tactical decision the alien commander had made. Kethva was smart, ruthless, and had killed thousands of Jake's soldiers. "What do you want?" Jake asked. His voice was cold and automatic. Kethver raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I want to talk about the war, about what it did to both of us." Jake considered closing the door. But curiosity, one of the few emotions he still felt, made him step aside. Kethver entered the apartment and looked around. The walls were covered with battle maps and tactical analyses. Books about military strategy were stacked everywhere. It looked like the home of someone still fighting a war that had ended 15 years ago. Kethver sat down carefully, his movements graceful and precise. "You live like a soldier who never came home from battle." "I never did come home," Jake replied. "There is no home to come back to." The alien studied Jake with large, dark eyes. "That is why I am here. My people are facing a crisis because of a war with humanity. We need to understand what happened to us. More importantly, we need to understand what happened to you." Kethver explained that Zephyrian society was built on something called Veltar, which meant the harmony of advanced consciousness. For thousands of years, the Zephyrians had believed that intelligent species naturally evolved beyond the need for warfare. They fought humans expecting a quick victory over a primitive species. Instead, they encountered something that shattered their understanding of civilization itself. Humans fought in ways that made no sense to Zephyrian logic. They sacrificed themselves for others without hesitation. They found ways to win battles that should have been impossible to win. They refused to surrender, even when surrender was the only rational choice. "We thought we were fighting barbarians," Kethver said. "We discovered we were fighting something far more dangerous. We were fighting a species that could transcend its own limitations through sheer will." Jake listened without expression. He had heard analysis of human fighting spirit before. It did not interest him much. Kethver continued. "But the cost of that transcendence was something we never expected. You became so good at war that you could no longer exist without it. You became the perfect weapon by ceasing to be completely human." That got Jake's attention. What do you mean? Kethver leaned forward. My people have been studying humans like you since the war ended. Soldiers who survived, but were changed beyond recognition. You represent something new in the galaxy. A species that can willingly sacrifice its individual essence for collective survival. The alien explained that this concept was completely foreign to Zephyrian thinking. In their society, individual consciousness was sacred. The idea of deliberately destroying parts of oneself for the greater good was horrifying to them. Yet humans did it regularly during the war. You are not broken by combat, Kethver said. You were evolved by it. Every battle, every loss, every impossible victory carved away pieces of your individual self until only the part that could win wars remained. Jake felt something stir inside him that might have been anger. So I am some kind of evolutionary experiment to you? No, Kethver replied. You are a tragedy. The greatest tragedy my people have ever witnessed. The alien stood and walked to Jake's wall of battle maps. He studied them for a long moment before speaking again. We came to your world believing we were bringing order to chaos. Instead, we discovered that chaos, properly directed, could defeat any order. We learned that a species willing to sacrifice everything could accomplish anything. Kethver turned back to Jake. But we also learned the cost of that sacrifice. We watched humans like you become living weapons. We saw what happened when individual consciousness was subsumed into collective purpose. Jake felt confused. No one had ever described his condition this way before. Dr. Campbell talked about trauma and healing. His fellow humans talked about heroism and sacrifice. But Kethver was describing something different entirely. What happened to me was necessary, Jake said. Humans needed soldiers who could think like I think, fight like I fight. Yes, Kethver agreed. It was necessary. That is what makes it so tragic. The alien explained that Zephyrian society was splitting apart because of the war. Half believed they needed to become more like humans, more willing to sacrifice individual desires for collective survival. The other half was horrified by the idea of losing their individual consciousness. We are studying you because we need to understand the price of becoming what war requires, Kethver said. My people are asking themselves if survival is worth losing who we are. Jake had never thought about the war from the alien perspective. He had been too focused on winning to consider what defeat meant for the Zephyrians. Your people lost the war but kept their souls, Jake said slowly. Humans won the war, but some of us lost ours. Kethver nodded. That is exactly correct. And now both our species must decide what to do with that knowledge. The alien prepared to leave, but paused. At the door. There is something else you should know, Colonel Morrison. My people have great respect for what you accomplished during the war, but they also have great pity for what it cost you. After Kethver left, Jake sat alone in his apartment, thinking about their conversation. For the first time in 15 years, he was considering the war from a perspective other than pure tactics. He had always assumed that becoming the perfect soldier was simply what war required. He had never considered that his transformation was observed and studied by the enemy. He had never thought about whether the price he paid was worth the victory he helped achieve. Jake looked at his wall of battle maps with new eyes. They were not trophies of victory. They were evidence of what he had lost. Every battle represented another piece of his humanity, sacrificed on the altar of human survival. For the first time since the war ended, Jake Morrison began to wonder if there might be a way to reclaim what he had lost. 3 months after Kethver's visit, Jake received an urgent message from Lieutenant Amy Torres. She had been one of his best students at the academy, and now she was calling for help. A group of human colonists was trapped on a remote planet called Haven's Rest. Natural disasters had destroyed their communication systems and blocked all normal rescue routes. Amy's voice was desperate on the recording. "Colonel Morrison, we need someone who can think outside normal procedures. The colonists have been without supplies for 2 weeks. Standard rescue protocols have failed. We need the person who saved Europa Station." Jake stared at the message for a long time. He had not left Titan Colony in over a year. He had not worked with other people on anything important since he stopped teaching. The idea of leading a rescue mission felt both terrifying and strangely exciting. Dr. Campbell had been working with both human and Zephyrian researchers on something called the Interspecies Psychology Project. When she heard about the rescue mission, she contacted Jake immediately. "This could be exactly what you need," she told him over video call. "A chance to use your skills for saving lives instead of taking them. A chance to remember why you became a soldier in the first place." Jake was not convinced. "I became a soldier to kill aliens and protect humans. I was good at it. That does not mean I can help trapped colonists." "You became a soldier to protect people," Dr. Campbell corrected. "The killing was just a tool. Maybe it is time to find other tools." Amy Torres arrived at Titan Colony with a small rescue team that included both humans and Zephyrians. Jake was surprised to see aliens working alongside human rescue workers. 15 years after the war, the two species were learning to cooperate. Kethvar was part of the rescue team. He nodded respectfully to Jake. "Colonel Morrison, I hoped you would join this mission." Jake looked at the mixed group of rescuers. They were young, enthusiastic, and completely unprepared for the kind of problem they were facing. Haven's Rest was surrounded by massive storm systems that made normal approaches impossible. The colonists were trapped in underground shelters with limited air and food. "Why do you need me?" Jake asked. "This is a rescue operation, not a battle." Amy stepped forward. "Because rescue operations sometimes require the same kind of thinking that wins battles. We need someone who can see solutions that others cannot see." Jake studied the mission data. The planet was experiencing severe weather that would last for several more weeks. The colonists could not survive that long. Normal rescue ships could not penetrate the storm systems. The situation was impossible by standard procedures. But Jake Morrison had built his reputation on making impossible things possible. The rescue team's ship, the Horizon Walker, was designed for peaceful missions. It was not built for the kind of approach Jake had in mind. But Jake had learned long ago that ships, like soldiers, could be pushed beyond their design limits. He worked with the human and Zephyrian engineers to modify the ship. They stripped out non-essential systems, reinforced the hull, and installed improvised heat shields. The changes were dangerous and violated several safety protocols. In peacetime, such modifications would never be approved. But Jake was not thinking like a peacetime commander. He was thinking like someone who understood that sometimes rules had to be broken to save lives. Kethvar watched Jake work with fascination. "You are becoming the Ghost Walker again," the alien observed. "But this time you are walking through impossible rescue scenarios instead of impossible battle scenarios." Jake paused in his planning. The alien was right. For the first time in 15 years, Jake felt like himself again. Not the hollow man who taught tactics at the academy, but the soldier who found ways to win when winning seemed impossible. The modified Horizon Walker punched through the storm systems using a technique Jake borrowed from old mining operations. Instead of trying to fly over or around the storms, they flew through them at specific angles that used the storm's own energy to power their descent. It was terrifying, dangerous, and completely insane. It also worked perfectly. The colonists were trapped in 3 separate underground complexes. Normal rescue procedures would have required multiple trips and several days. Jake coordinated a simultaneous extraction using mining equipment, improvised communications, and tactics that made no sense to anyone except him. Amy Torres watched Jake coordinate the rescue with amazement. This was not the distant, empty man she had known at the academy. This was someone alive with purpose, solving problems with creativity and determination. The most difficult moment came when they discovered that one shelter had partially collapsed. 2 families were trapped in a section that could not be reached by normal methods. The other rescuers wanted to call for specialized equipment that would take days to arrive. Jake studied the problem for 10 minutes, then announced they would dig a new tunnel using controlled explosions. Everyone told him it was too dangerous. Jake replied that leaving people to die was more dangerous. He worked alongside human and Zephyrian rescuers, directing the placement of each charge with the same precision he had once used to plan military assaults. The tunnel breakthrough came exactly where Jake had calculated it would, when the last colonist was safely aboard the Horizon Walker. Amy Torres found Jake sitting alone in the cargo bay. He was staring at his hands, which were covered in dirt from the rescue tunnels. "How do you feel?" she asked. Jake looked up at her, and for the first time in years, his eyes were not empty. "I feel like I remember why I became a soldier," he said quietly. Dr. Campbell's final report on Jake. Morrison became famous in both human and Zephyrian psychological circles. She wrote that recovery from extreme adaptation was possible, but not through forgetting or suppressing the past. Recovery came through finding new ways to use the same skills for constructive purposes. Jake accepted a position as director of the new Interspecies Emergency Response Initiative. He would lead joint human-Zephyrian teams in rescue operations across the galaxy. It was work that required all of his tactical genius, but used it to save lives rather than take them. 6 months later, Jake was teaching a mixed class of human and Zephyrian rescue specialists. He stood before the group, explaining how to approach impossible situations with creativity and determination. One student, a young Zephyrian named Veltar, asked Jake how he had learned to see solutions that others missed. Jake thought about the question carefully. "I learned by losing everything that made life worth living," he said. "Then I learned that the only way to get it back was to use what I had gained to help others keep what I had lost." He looked around the classroom at the eager faces watching him. Humans and aliens learning to work together. Young people who would never have to pay the price his generation had paid. "I survived human wars and lost my soul," Jake continued. "But I discovered that souls can be rebuilt, one life saved at a time." Jake Morrison had found his way back to humanity, not by forgetting what he had become, but by choosing to become something better.